really excited about it, but then as it starts getting close, you're like, oh my god, I'm not even spending time at home. And like for me, it's just finding that balance.
Which I couldn't, so thank you. I would have given you the same advice.
Flaky obviously has a problem.
I would have given you the same advice, except it would be very, bad coming from my mouth. So I'm very happy that he's a sensible person here.
About the balance, I didn't find a balance. I spent a lot of time after work at home. Also, I have a child, but I do not participate in my family life because I have a lot of interesting what I need to do investigate. So, what I found, try to find something interesting for you, and it will be like computer gaming, and you will get a pleasure, so you will enjoy it, and it will be better to you, so you will not be tired. So try something interesting. That's what I mean. And try to be closer to community, communicate with people. If you will be close to community, you will know problems, interesting. You will know all news, right? So that's my tips.
All right. You want to say something? So, quick question: is it worth it? I mean, you're working in communities. Is it worth it? Or?
Is it worth it to do all of these things, to spend all this time? I mean, I think none of us would be sitting up here if we didn't think it was. I think that for me, it's all about kind of making these connections, and so coming out, doing lots of events, doing lots of work. Maybe it's writing blog posts for other people, things like that. Really getting out there and trying new things, trying new technologies it's first of all really fascinating and fun in and of itself, but more importantly for me, it helps build new connections for me between myself and other people who are thinking about problems in different ways, who are approaching things from their point of view. And I think that when, and also going back to the question of balance, it's like what makes us able as an industry and as a community to advance and to come up with new ideas and to try to push technology further is if we bring ourselves and our unique perspectives as humans, as individuals, and whatever our learnings are from the background we have, the problems we work on, our family experience, our experience in the world, bringing that into our work and bringing our unique voices and talking it over with others and trying to find solutions to problems that we haven't seen before. We really need to be doing that. Like, we need to remember that we are people and not just code writing machines and things like that. And I think that that's what makes it worth it for me, is really getting to know people, getting to see how others are bringing their identities and bringing their backgrounds to the work that they do. For me, it's also just really about the people. Like, obviously, we come here and we discuss technology, and that's great. But that's really, when I come to conferences, that's really when I step outside of my bubble, which is super important and something that I think each and every one of you should do. Like, maybe not a speaker, but like maybe just participating on conferences and getting to share and exchange ideas, because that's what really makes your work great. Like, it's not going to be the stack that you use, it's not going to be the right framework, it's going to be like how much do you actually understand your user, the problem that you're actually trying to solve. And coming to conferences and speaking to actual people, like, it's going to make that work. So I think that's, it's tiring, it takes a toll on your life, it takes a toll on your work, but it's definitely something that defines my work, defines me as a person, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
There's a funny thing about the question itself. When you ask, is it worth it? The problem is you usually don't know if it's gonna worth it. You can tell, a few years later if it was worth it. And so, we can give you our advices, but we're going to be looking. We have the benefit of the hindsight. We will tell you that we're sitting here, so it was perfect for us. But you never know in advance, so it's a hard question to say anything smart about it.
That's actually really true, and sort of falls into my answer where when I first started getting involved in community and when I first pushed out my first thing to GitHub and was terrified of open source, there was no way that you would have been able to convince me that at that time, that several years down the road, Microsoft would literally going to contact me and say, we would love to interview you, we have the perfect position for you. I never would have believed you. And I'm like, that hindsight to me is exactly what you said. And it's directly because of my community work that they even knew who I was. And that's just like, I broke down in tears on the subway when I realized I got the job, because to me that's just a dream that I didn't even have the guts to have ambition for. And so that privilege of me having spare time to spend with community directly influenced my career in ways that I never would have imagined.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. There's another question that was asked by the audience. How do you learn new technologies and keep up to date? Do you have any secret that you can share with us?
The question was, how do we keep up with technologies? Do we have any secrets for that? For me, I curate lists of technical people on social media like Twitter, and I wake up in the morning and just kind of have a look at what people are saying. And if something looks engaging to me but I don't have time to look it up, then I'll send it to like an app that lets you read it later. So there are a lot of them out there that I use Pocket. And then, you know, if I'm just like struggling with a coding problem, or if I need a break, or if I'm eating breakfast or whatever the next day, usually that's when I'm looking for some entertainment, and so I'll go back through and I'll read the articles that I thought were interesting or of use to me. So like that's been the only way I've been able to scale that issue, because otherwise you just like your attention is so fragmented because you feel so overwhelmed with having to read absolutely everything that you see online.
Yeah, I think it's two things, like, because there's so many things coming out, it's just hard to keep track of everything that you could actually use. It's new, and it's hard to actually learning those things and being able to apply it. Well, for the first part, there's a really good way to find that out, which is, do you have an idea? It's going to conferences. So that really helps me to just keep track of everything that is interesting or that is being recently developed. I can tell you how many times I actually saw someone's talk on some like new specifications for ECMAScript or like some new feature on Node that I was able to actually apply on my personal or work life projects. And that is like one of the best ways that I actually know, because since you're watching someone's talk, you can actually, if you're there in a conference, you can make questions to the person that is actually developing it, and that's something that's very unique. You should all like take advantage of that. The fact that you're here is something that's really, really valuable. But we can all like, we can really risk falling into the trap of like JavaScript fatigue and stuff. So one thing that I really like doing is just like focusing on the parts that I want to try first. Because if you try to do everything at the same time, you're probably not going to get a good grasp of what it actually does. So like try to divide that by like, okay, I feel like diving into worker threads right now. So fine, just like take some time, study that. After you're done, then you can tackle something else. Don't try to tackle everything together.
I'd like to say something. Hey guys, you came to conference. Try before the end of conference to meet 10 new people. You have to communicate, right? Find 10 new people about how to be on top, so about news, like how to learn more. So Twitter is the first place, because when someone writes something interesting, he pushed in Twitter update, hey, I did a library, I did an instrument. You don't have to wait 6 months when the article will be written, right, for this. You just read Twitter. The second, read source code. I read a lot of V8 source code, libuv source code, because it's badly documented. And there is a good idea for understanding how does it work. The second, from my experience, when you work, try to find something interesting, something strange, like in the Matrix. For example, in 2015, when I worked in San Francisco, I found that nobody cared about monitoring diagnostics in production, and I found some problems. But when I went to SF Node meetup and I made Dan show by his t-shirt Node source, I asked him then some questions, like, and Dan said, yes, there is a problem, we have some tools, but we have a lot of didn't solve, is not solving the problems, like, and I start to feel that I'm not alone. And people like Dan, the usual regular people like me, we all have problems. And Node community is so open just to communicate. Moreover, about how to learn more. Node community streams, broadcast all their meetings in YouTube. You can see it in real time. Moreover, you can participate. I participated this year in Node.js user feedback session several times. It's so awesome. You can ask anything about Node, about your problems, by Dan Show, Michael Dawson, in a call, in Zoom. It's so awesome. So Node community is very popular. One more thing, it's books. You have to read books because if you want to be an expert, and you have to be an expert, even in a small part, you have to be an expert. It may be a button, it may be promises, but try to be an expert. But if you read a small article, you will not be an expert. You will know about something like this, but to be an expert, you have to read a book, right? Which is your favorite book, guys, on Node.js? Who can tell me? What is your favorite book? Okay, maybe one. Okay, my favorite book is Node.js Design Patterns, 2nd edition. It's the best book for Node.js. Try to read it. I read a lot of books on Node. This is the best one. Try the first book. Read the first book, the second book, and after that you will have a whole picture about where is Node, how to do that, because the information in books is different, really different. Don't believe it. And yeah, I guess that's all.
Interesting. So that's interesting, your points. I'm not sure I entirely agree about the you need to be an expert thing. I think what comes to my mind when you ask about, how do you stay on top of everything is, I can't. There's too much out there. There's too many of us now doing too many cool things and talking about it and sharing knowledge. And so I think that one of the most important things for me, and it also goes back to, how do you remain a human and also do this stuff, is stopping this idea I had in my head of thinking that there was going to be a time where I have learned everything, or I have become the expert, or I have, downloaded the knowledge like the Matrix into my brain and now I know Kung Fu. It's like, I don't think it works like that. I think when I started to think about learning as a completely continuous process that's never done, because the minute you've learned one thing, the world has changed and you have new information to learn now. And so I think once I managed to kind of free up myself from this idea that I had to be the expert or that I had to know everything that was out there or be aware of all of the things, it really made it so much easier for me to just dig into the things that I was curious about and be able to say, oh no, what's that new thing? I haven't heard of it. Please tell me, that sounds really cool. Instead of feeling, oh no, I don't know what those words mean. Help, I am scared. So I think for me, really starting to relieve myself of that pressure of like, you have to be the expert, you have to like have all of this knowledge in your head, and instead thinking of it as, you're always going to be learning, you're always going to not know something, and the more things you know, the more things you find out you don't know, right? So for me, that was the big turning point.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that focus is important. Because you cannot learn everything, and when you can focus on something, you can become an expert. You can become somebody. You can soothe your own soul of knowing more about a particular subject, and that might feed into you feeling more adequate. We're always going to feel inadequate in all kinds of various ways. But if you can teach yourself a bunch of things and go very deeply into a single topic, that's always gonna give you, some kind of peace of mind. Going back to Ben, how do you keep on top of things? You don't have to keep on top of things. If you go to conferences, you cannot always go to conferences. A lot of conferences actually stream live or upload their talks. You can just, cherry pick the best talks. People will tell you, how this was my favorite talk from this conference. And you can just watch it later on. You don't have to spend money. You don't have to, ask for vacation days to go to a conference. And Twitter is overwhelming. I know, I use it a lot, and it is pretty overwhelming. There are actually very good ways to keep up on like new tech stuff. A lot of people lament the sunset of RSS, but there is a thing that is almost as good. And we all know we all have like full inboxes. You can subscribe to many very nice newsletters, and there are companies who have newsletters and there are technologies, and like Mozilla has one, whatever. But interestingly, some people actually write their own newsletters. So you can subscribe, just as you can subscribe somebody's Twitter feed, you can subscribe somebody's distilled updates over newsletters, and it could it has a very good way of keeping you like giving you a distilled look into what things you might be interested in, what should be interesting to you that you might want to focus on.
Okay. Continuing with this topic, I think this is a chance to actually help junior devs or people that want to start contributing to open source projects. You have any side project or any project that you think is a good fit for junior developers?
Well, I do. I do way too many side projects. I have a lot of side projects. My favorite one, the latest one, is Cloud.boy. It's just this thing that I explicitly wanted to make it easier to people to get into hardware. And I'm not the only one with side projects on this panel like that. What I really want to get to at some point, so you always feel very bad about your side projects because they are simply just side projects. You don't have tests, the code is ugly and all that. But trying to and struggling to release them to people to have people see it, and you're always going to feel bad about it, even though people would be happy to dive into that mess and hack around it. I'm trying to open source and keep all my side projects open source and deliberately mentoring people. So if you ever want to help me, like if some of you have been to the workshop I did, if you want to create games in JavaScript and then play them on tiny microcontrollers, the whole thing is in JavaScript. So if you're interested in that, just find me afterwards or go to cloudboy.org.
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of stress the fact that you do not have to have a side project. Like, it is a good thing for you to practice code if you want to, but the thing is that I think we have a very toxic culture in our area to think that people should live, breathe, and sleep code. That is not actually true. You can, if you already work, good, the work is probably gonna be taking up 8 hours of your day, so that's probably where you're gonna do the most practicing. So I think it's more important to think of people who could mentor me and push me to be even better. Then how can I fill all my free space with code? Because eventually, two things that could happen. Obviously, you're probably going to have a really good time, but at the same time, it's not good to think of that as an obligation because you're going to feel pressured about your own side project, and you're going to feel bad because it's not good enough. So keep in mind that it's just, it can be literally anything you want. It's just, I have a habit of doing side projects whenever I want to learn something new. You're probably gonna have that habit for the rest of your professional career. So don't be pressured into thinking that because you're a junior developer or because you're someone that's starting out in the field, so I should and I have to have a side project. That's just good to have. It's just if you feel like you learn better by applying, it's probably a good idea, but do not feel pressure at all to just feel like you need to do this 100% of your time.
That was great. I'm gonna take the opportunity because we have 3 women in the panel to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. So do you have any piece of advice that you could give to women developers in the audience that will help them?
Yeah, definitely. Don't leave, please. That is the advice. I know it's hard. I think all of us here have been through rough patches because we're women in this area, which can be very sexist and very toxic and hostile for women. But the thing is that, don't feel that because you're not the same as 90% of the people in the area, which are usually white dudes,
don't feel oppressed or think that you do not have a place, because you absolutely do, and each one of us have something to contribute. So like, even if you're going through hard phases, like try to reach out to someone that is likely like you. There's a bunch of community initiatives just for girls. So try to look for an environment where you feel safe, where you feel supported, and where you can identify yourself. Because identifying yourself is very important. It's basically one of the biggest reasons why I do talks and why I speak. It's because to show, like, hey, I am here in this stage doing exactly the same as every other people, so you can too. Because I think an advice could be like, hey, just get up there and do it. Even if you're scared, like, just give it a try. Because like I was, fun fact, I was also terrified of open source in the beginning, because it's overwhelming and it's scary for you to just like go there and open up a pull request with something that you really treasure and that you really value, and all of a sudden maybe there's some people that are not going to agree with you, and that's really scary, and that's like you feel vulnerable. But at the same time, like, that's going to make you like stronger in the future. So do not try to make new things or do things that you never did before, because that's basically what's going to give you strength in the future.
I'm not an expert in this topic, sorry. Because in Russia, in my current project team, there is 60% of women in team, and it was the same, like half and half in previous team and previous my job. I don't know, I know that by Twitter that there is a problem in the world. I totally agree. What I can advise, try to solve the root of this problem. It's maybe education, I don't know, maybe something social. Go deeper in this topic. And for example, my mother started to learn HTML this year, so it's funny. My sister as well. So it's open for us. YouTube, you know, internet. So it's open. That's all.
I think it's out there. It's available, that information, but it can also be really scary. It can be really hard. You can feel very alone when maybe it's because of your gender, or maybe it's because of your race or your nationality, when you're somehow different from the people who you see standing on stage, or the people who you see posting on Twitter or writing blog posts. And so I think what Isa said earlier, don't give up, hang in there, is important advice. And for me, the best way that I found to do that was to find a community of people with whom I could feel safe, psychologically safe, to say, hey, what is this thing? I don't know what that word means. Or, hey, can you explain that thing you just described in more detail? Finding communities like that, and they are out there. They're at places like this, at conferences. They are online, even if you don't have people who are physically near you. For me, those communities I talked a little bit about today, like the Recurse Center, are outreachy, tech speakers, the JS conferences that I go to in the web community has been really welcoming. I think it's incredibly important to find the people who are there to support you and validate your experience and help you keep going when it gets really hard. It's really important as a marginalized person to find those networks and find those people who you can feel safe with, because the industry as a whole is not going to make you feel incredibly safe. And that's where I would actually say that on this topic, I think it's important that we not give advice just to the marginalized people, like women who have that hard work to do to break into the industry, but to everybody else, to everyone out there who can be an ally, who can use their privilege. Maybe it's as a man, maybe it's because of their race, maybe it's because of their fact that they're sitting on stage like I am right now. That's very privileged, as Dora really eloquently stated yesterday. I think it's important that we all be asking ourselves, what can I be doing right now to make this space that I am in safer and more accessible and more inclusive for other people who are not like me? What can I do to amplify their voices? What can I do to reach out a hand? Whether it's maybe at this conference, later at the coffee break, going up to someone who you see standing alone, or inviting someone to join your technical conversation. Whatever it may be, we all need to be working on that. It's not just something that we should ask the people who are already marginalized and already have that hard work to do even more.
All of you sounded so eloquent, so what I'm about to say is going to sound like a trash pile, but if you're here today, or if you're watching this, if it's recorded, and you are a woman, or you are just generally a minority in tech, and think about if you like code, if you like tech, if you like this stuff, like think about, just forget everything else, and think about why you like those things, and think about how excited you are, and think about how hard you've already worked to get here. No one has the right to take that away from you at all. You have the right to be able to keep doing this stuff, and anyone who is trying to take that right away from you is wrong. It's just end of story. It is wrong. If you like this stuff and you're really into it, screw those people, and if they are getting in your way and you've found your community, get them to help you to just get them out of your way. And I wish I'd done that earlier. This is your space too, and we're gonna all work together to make it better.
This is how Sue sounds like when she's stressed, right? Imagine when she's eloquent. No, I just want to add one thing. We're all humans, except some of our unicorns and foxes. And we all make mistakes. You're gonna make mistakes, and that's fine. Just try to be better, strive to do better the next time. All right?
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was a great message. So let's go back to open source. So we have seen that big companies have shifted, in terms of cultural shifts around open source, and they have started to contribute to big open source projects, and actually they have started to invest money on open source. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's the future? Do you think that's an evolution of open sourcing? What could happen with community-driven projects now that companies are investing time and effort to maintain those projects?
Hey, so I like open source. Actually, my company do not a lot of in JavaScript in open source. We do a lot of in big data. But there is a company like Nearform, So they have a big expertise, and they have a whole picture in the world of problems, and they have resources, so they can do something new, instruments, they can solve problems. So, for example, it's from my vision, what I saw. They created the Rails profiler, right? They had different projects, and they just tried this profiler on different projects. After that, they found slowest logger, different other parts. They created the fastest framework, right? Fastify. So one by one, so they solved problems one by one. And open source is awesome because you can read the code more or less. When I work with some of the tools, I found that I'd like to have more features. I know the features when I want to implement. You can communicate, you can describe with them, because open source is not only for code writing. You can just tell, you can just spoke with people. You can propagate or populate some interesting topics about open source, about instruments. That's it.
So I believe everybody has a responsibility. So open source is a thing that you cannot take away. It's clear to see that open source is here to say it's definitely making the world a better place. I think that's not up for debate. The question is, who's gonna take responsibility for it? Who's gonna take care of open sources? How are we gonna evolve this newborn open source ecosystem? Like this is like what, 20, 30, 40 years old, like writing code and sharing that without asking for anything in return is a new concept. And when it's just small communities trying to make this work, that's a different problem to solve when you get like 10 million contributors on a big open source project, sometimes owned or created by and eventually open sourced by a big company. So the very important thing I think is not, we didn't figure it out yet. I don't think anybody has figured it out. It's how we're going to support all the ecosystem that we're building, the open source ecosystem we're building, and how do we make sure that we don't that we actually take care of it and don't exploit people who work on these open source tools that we have. How do we properly give back to the community and give back to the people or unicorns who are contributing towards our projects?
I think that we were talking about this backstage, about how companies know that they don't really have much of a choice anymore, but to embrace open source, it's a good business decision. And I honestly believe that when large companies open source their products get better as a result of that. It gets beyond the walled garden, and you're actually hearing from developers that are using this stuff, and they actually feel like there's less of a barrier to even just like complain about the product by raising an issue on GitHub or something like that. I think that, like from what you all said previous to me, I think we should be really, really careful, because there's a fine line between a large company is open sourcing their software, which is great and we can all contribute, to that becoming an exploitable situation where this company has an entire team that's dedicated to working on this product, and then all of a sudden we have this free labor coming from the community, and that feels very awkward as well. And so it's interesting because I've actually run up against this where I've spoken to people who have complained about some documentation or something that's open source from a large company, and I'll say, oh, it looks like you could probably just fix that section of the documentation, and they'll just look at me flatly and say, I refuse to do any work in my personal time for a large company that has the budget to have not had that issue in the documentation in the first place. And so I think that's actually a very compelling discussion that we don't have. It's not just large companies using open source and not paying back to it. It's also this company open sourcing their stuff, but then expecting that they can either expecting that the community is going to catch them out, right? And that they're going to care enough to be able to do that. And I think that this is definitely a work in progress, and I think it's heading in a generally good direction, but right now I think this is where it's the toughest thing, where we just haven't figured out what is like actually ethical about that. And so I don't have an answer, I just wanted to raise that as a thing because that's what I'm hearing a lot, given that I work in an open source space for a company that celebrates open source. That's generally what I'm hearing from other community members.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that like Flaky said, open source is here to stay, but the work that we're going to have to do now, especially as big companies start open sourcing more of their code and using more open source code, the work that we have to do is going to be kind of related to the systems of people who maintain and contribute and give back to this code. So speaking about diversity, open source is even less diverse than tech as a whole. It relies on unpaid labor, and oftentimes the people who have the privilege to be able to sit at home and contribute their free time, that means they maybe don't have other responsibilities, they're not working 3 jobs, they're not perhaps responsible for childcare or for other duties, and so this is a smaller set of people than the population at large. And we also then have work to do to figure out new ways of building new models for compensation, for establishing fairness of who is being able to carve out time from their lives to work on these things. I know Artie talked about outreachy a lot today, but I think outreach is a really interesting example of an initiative that's trying to establish a sort of new pattern or a new paradigm for how we can get more people involved in open source with money behind it, how we can get companies to involve new people who might not otherwise have been able to sit down and contribute to these projects. And I think that we have a lot of work to do in that area, figuring out these new communities, figuring out these new ways of doing governance, of doing compensation and things like that. But if and when we figure out better solutions to these problems, and it'll be an ongoing process as always, but we'll end up with much stronger technology as a result. I think absolutely that, open source, the fact of having to expose your code to everyone in the world, and especially once we can figure out how to let everyone, regardless of where they come from or what their background is, contribute back to it, is going to get us to a better place as an industry as a whole. So I look forward to it, but it's going to be a lot of work to get there.
Yeah, I think the main thing here that we also have to make sort of effort to run down is the fact that it's very cultural in our area to think that people with their code in some sort of big framework, they're prestigious or something, or that they're better than people who do not contribute for open source. Because for me, the meaning of open source is just a code that you can use for free in your stuff. Doesn't mean that you necessarily have to actually contribute to it in the sense of not getting paid for work that you're doing on someone else's tools, and other things revolving around this, which are again very culturally. One thing that I really hate, recruiters who find you through GitHub. That's just fucking insane. Why should it matter? Because most of us, we work at private companies doing private code. It's awesome that people like Suze get to do code for all of us to work for open source, but that's not the general rule. Most of the code that I do in my professional time is closed. It's not apparent to anyone, but that doesn't mean that I'm a less capable developer, or that I'm worse, or that I'm not contributing. So it's a very strong cultural sense that open source equals prestige, and that has to end now, because it just means that, okay, good, you're giving your time to a tool that you really like, or for a technology that you believe in, but that doesn't say anything about how good of a developer you are.
So, there's a lot to unpack here. I'm not even trying to. I want to see a few thoughts just to lead us off. I don't think we don't need to move on. Open source has a lot of meanings, and you're just gonna throw some code up on the internet and make it downloadable by anybody. It doesn't mean that it's those people are gonna be able to use it. But there is a very important distinction here. Where you release something as a company that you build inside, and you're not providing any support for it, or you as a personal project release something on the internet, and not people asking you for more of your free time. There's a very fine line and a very nuanced distinction between the two things, and they should be treated very differently. You should be able to release code on the internet and not care about how people use it, and not get flagged from people because you're not willing to implement their feature, or you've merged the pull request. Okay, you're not you don't owe these people anything. But when you're as a company releasing open source software, it's a whole another can of worms, because you have to figure out, if you actually want to take open source contributions, you're gonna have to support those people in providing open source contributions.
All right. So now let's talk about important stuff, the things that you really like and you feel very opinionated about them. So first off, let's talk about OOP versus functional programming. Do you think it's a choice? Which one do you prefer?
I personally prefer functional programming, but I think it's really based on the problem that you have, or the approach that you're trying to solve, or what mental model do you work best on? Because there's no superior thing here. It's just two different ways of doing stuff. So it's my personal preference of doing things functional style, but that again, it's not a general rule.
Can I just say, if you see my dog, a language is just a tool. A programming paradigm is also just a tool.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off that real quick, I like to think about it who has played with React? Yeah. There's a few. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm probably only hitting part of the audience, but the way I like to think about it is React has component classes where you create a stateful component, right? And then you can create presentational components that are more functional. They just spit out a line of JSX or HTML. it's rare that you would build an app that would basically allow you to do to just use one of those, right? And so, sometimes you're going to have higher order components that might want to have its own state, and then other times you're going to have these presentational components that just take information down and just like splat it out on the page. And so it doesn't always have to be one or the other. And just think about, like, would this benefit from state? And can I write this in a way where it's just mutating its own state and not anything outside of it? There are definitely, I see this more of a spectrum than an either or.
I know that functional programming is very popular now, but I'm a fan of OOP because I like patterns, I like architecture, and I saw the first projects on Node in the past. It was so terrible because people came from front end, they do not know a lot of patterns and how to maintain a big application or big structure. But Node is not only for OOP or functional, it's a combination, right? Because if we would like to have a structure, we have to implement some patterns, some structure, or maybe layers, features, and also like pure functions, right? Because if we would like to create a factory, we use a function. It's a pure function. So it's a combination of OOP and functional programming.
So, yes, I think that everyone has kind of touched on what I want to say here, so I'll be brief. But basically, well, perhaps you know that I like talking about functional programming, and I also just love talking about programming paradigms in general. And I think that as others have mentioned, as programmers, it behooves us to wrap our heads around as many different paradigms, as many different abstractions as possible, so that we have as many different mental models as possible to solve whatever the problem is that comes up. And as we said, I think that different paradigms give us different tools to solve different problems. However, that said, between OOP and functional particularly, I feel like you step back a little bit and you squint, and they're not really that different. This is something that I've given a couple talks about. I think that they have slightly different ways of solving the problem of shared mutable state, that they approach that issue from different angles, and OOP will say, okay, well, don't share the state, just wrap it up and keep it in objects. And functional programming will say, well, okay, don't have state in the first place, and then you can share whatever you want. And so I think if you kind of step back and look at things from a sort of a philosophical angle, which I can't help but doing because my background is not in computer science, it's in philosophy. And I think once you do that, you notice that actually, all of these wars online, all of this hate that people will throw at each other, and whatever, it's kind of all silly. We could all just be getting along, So I think it's whatever works best for you, whatever mental model fits the problem, the way you and your mind see it, that's what you should be using.
Thank you for coming to Anjana's TED Talk.
Right. I have another one. Typing systems. TypeScript, Flow. Are you using them? Do you like them? Do you think it's the future of JavaScript?
I feel like, as the person who works at Microsoft, I should make a statement about TypeScript. And I'm going to say this without bias. Like, I started using TypeScript before I started working at Microsoft, and I actually think it's a good thing. I think types sometimes are exaggerated and overhyped to be the solver of every single bug you could possibly ever imagine in your program, which is not true. And I think we all know that, but it does get a little bit hyped sometimes. I think it's great for guardrails. I think that JavaScript, which was mentioned in somebody's talk, this conference, forgive me, I forget, that JavaScript is great because it has a low barrier to entry because it's very dynamic, which also makes it very forgiving in a lot of ways. And I think that is a really nice thing about not having a strongly typed system. And when you're dealing with things like large-scale production apps, or just working on software with another person can be enough of a reason to want to use types, so that, because there are going to be parts of the code base that you are not as familiar with because somebody else wrote it, or someone else maintains it, or they left and you had to take it over. And so I think, yes, it is great to be able to have the option of something like TypeScript or Flow or whichever system that you like using. I'm a big fan of it in general. I just don't know whether or not, that is going to be the ideal direction that we go in the future for JavaScript, like on an actual language implementation level, because I think that right now we're still in the experimentation phases of what does this actually look like. And I think we have some really nice tooling, but it really, again, it's like, it depends, on what you're actually doing. If you're writing something really small and it's throwaway, why would you do that? But in general, I am a fan of having a little bit more type safety in JavaScript in general because of the nature of it going out to millions of people in a web browser. It's just like you just have this multiplier effect of you write that code once, and then people, one little bug just gets magnified everywhere. And so I think it's a nice thing that can help a little bit with guardrails.
Yeah, one thing that I feel is like people are going out there and trying to use TypeScript or some other type thing in their code, but the thing is like, don't do it just because of the hype, because usually you have a team of people working with that for you, so it's really important that everyone is on board, because what's probably going to happen in case you're trying to implement something with type checking but the rest of the team isn't, is that you're going to have a lot of things with a type any. So that isn't really type okay, guys. So remember to whenever you're making some technical decisions or you're figuring out what stack you're going to use in a project, make sure that everyone's on board. Because when you're working with a team, that is really important for you to have a consistent code base, and for you not have a component that is way different than the other one. Consistent is very important. So make sure you have that straightened out with the rest of the team beforehand. But yeah, I personally really like TypeScript. I think it's very nice for legibility and for if you have a team. And it really speeds up the process of onboarding a new person in the project and understanding the code base. I think it's nice. But seriously, always when you're deciding stacks, always think of the trade-offs and the cost for implementation.
All right.
Yeah.
So we said about the size of project. Also, don't forget about performance. For example, if you work if we do just rendering, okay, we don't need TypeScript. If you work with financial data, with numbers, we have to have the types. Okay. If you work with data streaming, we don't need to have a type checker because it's performance overhead. We just need to stream data. So make it choose correctly.
Yeah, but as is the resident Mozilla unicorn, it wouldn't be me if I didn't plug Rust. But what I wanted to say is you have to know what problems you want to solve with your types. Again, what issues come up from having or not having types. Is it, or if you're having types, you're gonna have that as a trade-off. Maybe your application code is going to look more complex. It's going to have a higher or lower barrier of entry based on what you're going to have. Maybe you don't like typing all of your types, and a lot of inference is happening in a lot of languages, including Rust. Rust is a strictly typed language, but most of the time you would be not seeing types because they would just be inferred from other functions and other stuff. Like Flow works very similar to this. And I believe TypeScript even. So you'll have to know what problems types solve you or not solve you, and make your trade-offs based on that. And if you have seen Francis talk, or if you have seen Torsten's talk, you're gonna know that the computers work in a certain way. And even if you're working in an untyped language, sometimes you're going to be writing code that looks like it was written for C++ because you're trying to churn out the most performance out of the language. Again, it's a spectrum, and you'll have to figure out what trade-offs you're willing to make.
Great. All right. Since we talk about the future of JavaScript, what do you think are the next trends or proposals or features in JavaScript, in Node, new API for the web that you think we should look into?
Sorry, the question is which new features should we look into?
Yeah, I think one big thing that's coming up, especially in Node, is the worker threads. That is a big deal because it greatly speeds up the power of processing that we have in Node. That is one really good thing to check out. And I think I can sense more of participation for different paradigms of programming in JavaScript, which is something that I think is very awesome. Because before we used to think of JavaScript as a strictly imperative programming language, but nowadays we can have like multiple ways to code in JavaScript. We can do it like 100% functional. We can do it class-oriented. We can have all these different styles for writing it, which I think is awesome because it's a very democratic language nowadays. Like you can just do however you feel it's best, and you can do like what you think is going to solve your problem better. Nowadays it's more powerful in that sense. You get many options. But yeah, I think that's the main thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sort of echoing the answers to the last few questions, it's all about having the right abstractions and the right tools to solve as many different problems as possible. And so I think since JavaScript is, has taken over the world, what do you say, Flocky? Already, or is taking over the world? It's on its way. It's on its way to world domination, if not there already. In any case, since it's a language that we're all going to be using for some time to come, the more that we can do to make sure that the core of the language has the right abstractions to support as many different use cases and as many different approaches to the very, very different types of problems that we're going to be using this, what was supposed to be a little client-side scripting language to solve, that's going to be what's necessary going forward. That said, I'm also excited about things like WebAssembly, which allow us to when we need to, we've really been trying to fit this into a JavaScript world and it's still not working, to be able to have that kind of escape valve, escape hatch, and be able to write code in some other language and some other technology that we're going to be able to reuse across platforms and get to that singularity moment. That's something that's really exciting to me as well. So I think, again, it's all about having options, giving ourselves as an industry more options going forward.
Yeah, Worker.js was a hot topic this year. Also, we have a good tradition in one conference in Russia. During that conference, we collect idea via Twitter by audience and about what you like to see, a proposal to ECMAScript, what you want to have. After that, we got the most hot proposal, and the conference makes a proposal to ECMAScript. But moreover, guys, you can do it yourself. So you can just make a proposal, tweet it, and I saw a lot of guys who made it so simply. Don't afraid.
I don't know about you, but I'm really excited about WebUSB, but no one else is. Sure.
I am.
Yay! Oh yes, you're like my hardware buddy. WebUSB is going to be really good because traditionally, I'll explain what it is in a sec, but traditionally when you've written apps for hardware and you've had to distribute them to people, a lot of the time you get one shot at that. Like, they download it and they use it, and whether or not it's good or whatever, they then move on with their life. And then people just have these hard drives littered with like little apps that do this one thing with this one hardware device that someone buys off the shelf and then never again. And that frustrates me, and it's really hard to sort of like update them as well. And most of the time they're written with some weird like GUI layer that's not super accessible. And so I'm excited about WebUSB because you're going to be able to start plugging devices in. Little notification pops up that takes you to a specific like website that's hosted in the cloud, and then that website is configuring your device or setting it up or changing it or rebooting it or updating it. And that's really exciting to me because that changes the whole paradigm of how hardware software has worked for the longest time, and I like that that's disrupting it. And I think that there's a valid discussion in that, like, should we really be treating the browser like a full-blown operating system? Like, this is getting out of control. But I think that at least for like interacting directly natively with devices in the browser, that's an incredibly compelling discussion. And I'm hoping that the spec stays in browsers and expands to more browsers, because it's only on Chrome right now, so that we can actually explore that and show that there is value in having this in browsers. So that's my little like TED talk. Thanks for coming. And if you're interested in it, please try out the Web USB spec, because it's really fun and I'm really alone and it's basically Flucky and me. So yeah, anyway.
It's a lone island to be stranded on. Yeah,
Join the club. We're fun.
Yeah, give it power to the people. And by that I mean to the browsers. I think, should we really make the browser an operating system? If you ask the unicorn says a resounding yes. When you can lower the barrier of entry to a new technology, when you can make something more easily accessible to people, to developers, to provide experiences that wasn't possible before, yay for all of that. Problem is, there are not just nice and unicorny and shiny poopy people out there. The problem is, you're gonna give power not just to the nice people, but you're also gonna give that power to the baddies out there. And you always need to, if you have a large platform, and kind of the web is like the largest development platform ever built by humanity or anything that we know, you really need to make sure that you're not giving superpowers to supervillains that are going to emerge. So it's a really tough line to walk, and I personally would love to see more power in browsers. But I also keep an eye on the reality is that this needs a lot of work and a lot of introspection and a lot of testing and trial and error to get it right. Because we don't get it right, you get spectral meltdown and all those things and all the CVE vulnerabilities on the web, and you don't want those.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to add to this discussion is getting what Flaky said. It's I think we're moving towards a world where JavaScript and Node is really omnipresent. I met Tierney at Node.js last month, and he was talking about all the places where are run using JavaScript and Node. And did you know that when you have arrhythmia in your heart and your heart doesn't beat very right, you have to have a device that controls the beating of your heart. Some of it are powered by Node. Systems for controlling flights, some of them are powered by Node. So we're seeing this omnipresent of JavaScript, and that also means that we have bigger responsibilities now. Because we are used to thinking of languages and JavaScript in general as this plaything that we do for fun, and it's on the web and it's cute. But nowadays we really have things that change people's lives in case they don't work properly. So that also changes the perspective of open source. Because now we have a very big responsibility when we merge a pull request from someone. If that shit fails, maybe someone's life is going to be deeply affected by that. So I think it really changes figures in terms of how we actually feel and think about the JavaScript ecosystem. We definitely have bigger responsibilities to think of now, and I think that also changes the way that we should be treating open source. I think we should be much more responsible about it, and I think that's probably going to be a discussion that we're going to be seeing more in the future.
All right, I have another question from the audience. Which IDE do you use every day? Do you have any tips or tools that you use to boost your productivity?
Yeah, I don't know about productivity, but I really do believe in trying out several tools and seeing whatever works out best for you. Because, for example, I use VS Code. Thank you. I use VS Code. It's really good. Yes.
Single-handedly coded VS Code.
It's really awesome for me because I'm used to the shortcuts. I'm used to the way that the IDE behaves. But it's whatever you feel most comfortable with, and that you feel like you can do things faster without having a cognitive load to think about all the things that you want to do. For me, I see it sort of like driving. Because like in the beginning, you're not used to driving at all, so you have to think about all the things that you have to do. Like now I have to just get the steering wheel and do whatever. But afterwards, it becomes very natural. For me, that's the same thing with adapting to an IDE. It's a lot of effort, but it pays off afterwards. But that also changes for me from language to language, because another language that I really like doing things with is Clojure. And for Clojure, I really prefer doing using IntelliJ with cursive, which is like an add-on. Because it works for me in that language, so I think it really changes from the stack that you're using, the tools that you're using, the language.
I just push buttons on my computer. Like Isa sounds like she way more like has more elaborate like setup than I ever had before.
Oh, I used a lot of IDEs like Visual Studio of Microsoft when I written in C#. But after that, I started to use WebStorm, and where I created my own color schema, and I love it. But when my license was expired, I moved to VS Code. And when I found memory leak in VS Code, I moved back to WebStorm. I didn't want to wait when they will fix that memory leak, and so I'm really depend from that color schema that I cannot transfer to different IDs. It's my problem.
So day to day, I tend to use Atom, but I've used a lot of other editors and using different IDEs for different systems. Like I was saying backstage, I wouldn't know I wouldn't have the first idea how to write any Java code without Eclipse. I don't know, but I think that. I don't know, I feel like all of this time and energy that we as a community of programmers spend arguing about editors and tooling and things like that is like probably way more than we need to be worrying about it. It's probably like a giant yak shave for all of us. And I think that
Java uses spaces.
I do use spaces.
That's the next question.
But I think that, a good editor, to me, a good IDE, a good tooling environment, is one that disappears, that you don't notice anymore. The one that doesn't actually take any of your energy to like mess with or fiddle with, or it's something that just sort of becomes transparent, like a window that you can actually see the problem that you're working on and just go work on it. So I think all of this, I don't know how many like human years have been spent arguing like Vim versus Emacs or whatever, but imagine what we could have built in all that time.
Yeah, so I'm going to be the antidote to that because because I use Vim, right? But it's not that deep for me. You know what I mean? Like, when the Vim community has this like reputation in Emacs as well for being like this super duper into it, and there's got like a million different customizations and stuff like that, and that's just not me. Like the main reason why I started using Vim, I moved from Sublime Text to Vim, was because I was streaming Twitch streams when I was first starting out on a really, really, really old 4.5-year-old computer, and I literally just couldn't run that many apps while I was trying to stream, and so I was like, if I just use Vim in the terminal, which I already have open, then maybe my stream will actually survive. But then I found that after, like, it was the most painful experience of my life, like switching to it. Just like, where is my command D? Oh my God. But once I'd switched to it, what happened was, I got the job at Microsoft, and then I just was like obsessed. I was like moving all of my open source to VMs, like in Azure, because I was like really excited to test out Azure, and it was like get free credits and stuff. And I was shelling into a whole bunch of VMs all the time, which were just like spun up without a lot of stuff, and I wasn't using templates to install anything. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so much more productive shelling into these Vim things and like these VMs, and then using Vim to edit like config files and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I actually was just like, I feel like I can edit text anywhere. And so for me it just became like, it's just not that deep. My vimrc file is up online on GitHub under my .files repo, and people are like, you don't really have any plugins or anything, and your shortcuts are so short. And I was like, yeah, because I just don't care about it. To a certain point, once you get used to something, then it disappears and it's fine, right? And even like, who's heard of like MPG, like fun function? Like, yeah, he's yeah, oh God. But he's hilarious because he uses like, I think VS Code now, but he's like, I just do not install plugins because I just end up in this plugin hole of getting obsessed about plugins, and I'm just continually tweaking my setup forever. And then I'm doing it to become productive, but then I'm not productive because I'm just constantly fiddling with my IDE. And so I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I found a lot of relief just going to Vim because I was like, I can just leave it alone and get on with my life. But on a more serious note, I also use the Pomodoro app, which is kind of like a 20-minute production app where you work for 20 minutes and you have 5 minutes break. It's very goal-oriented, so if you're that person who loves goals and games and things like that and getting stuff done, I really like that because I have a lot of trouble focusing, I have a lot of trouble in general just with short-term memory and things like that. And so it just really laser focuses me, and I find that I'm much happier at the end of the day from running a few sprints. And maybe I'll only do that in the morning and then just kind of like have a quieter afternoon, but that really helps me. And it's important for me to talk about that because I know that there's a lot of you out there that either have like certain like mental health conditions that make it hard for you to stay productive and you chew yourself out for it, but finding those tools that actually kind of create a game out of it just to get your brain to like get into the shape that it needs to be to get your job done is important. But I also just don't want to over fetishize, I guess is the word, like productivity as well. So just like be really careful about that and don't burn yourself out for the sake of like being the most productive person in the world, but find tools like that stuff that kind of can like help reprogram you to sort of be healthy and happy in what you're actually doing.
I totally did not intend to, but I will have to play somewhat like the devil's advocate. Because what I was going to say to you is let computers do what computers are good at and help humans do what humans are good at. And when you're creating a software, this is something I learned when I was early on into cloud UI development, and I was creating this UI, and I was like, I don't want to make binary, like translate images into binary ones and zeros. Because that's what an Arduino can present. I want to draw an image, I want the computer to take care of the conversion. And I learned this really deeply, and I see this all over the place when you're creating user interfaces. And no, user interface is not just front-end code. User interface is an API, is a module, anything that has, that is code that you interact with other people. Other people are going to be interacting with this thing. You just think about it and make sure that you create an ergonomic software, ergonomic user interfaces, so people don't have to, tear out, pull out their hairs when they're using those. Just care for your fellow people, even if you don't know them.
That's just generally amazing advice.
Yes,
so
yes,
everyone
general,
need that.
That's our job. That's literally our job.
All right. This is the last question I have. At least for now. This is the most important question. So again, this was asked from someone in the audience. Let's say you need to develop a really large application. You need to choose between Node, Java, C#, and which one would you choose, taking into consideration maintainability, scalability, the ecosystem? What do you think?
Yeah, I really think it again really depends on the problem that you're trying to solve, because like all these languages, they have different characteristics. So for example, the C# could be possibly faster depending if you're trying to make things that are graphic oriented. So it really depends on the problem, and I really urge you guys to think about the problem first and then what technologies you're gonna use later, because people make really big mistakes when choosing stack when they do not consider the problem first. It's really hard to maintain something that later on is going to be a problem in terms of performance, or the team doesn't know the language. So and that is a really big one that keeps happening. If you one of the persons in the team chooses a stack, but the other ones aren't that familiar, so you end up with a code base that has a lot of anti-patterns, that has a lot of things that they're trying to mentally parse from their other language that they're more used to. So first of all, consider the problem. Second of all, consider who is going to maintain that. Do the people are comfortable with that choice? But again, like I think a lot of things that about being a senior developer, which is also something that's very controversial. Everybody wants to be the senior guy, the expert, whatever. This is what being senior looks like. It's considering problems first, technologies later. It's about saying that it depends. It's not having answers outside of the box, and like just seeing whatever works out for you in that situation, because everything just sort of depends. So yeah.
First of all, just yes. But also, as a senior developer, or just as a developer who's been put in charge of making this decision, like, show your notes. Like, don't just pick something and explain it in a meeting. Like pick a matrix of things that are important to you. Performance, the open source community quality of that particular language or tool. Developer onboarding for, like actually hiring and things like that. Make that decision and write everything down. And your job is not to make someone else do that, but for you to go and do the research, write it all down. That's showing respect to your team, and then come back and like present that, explain exactly why, and then have people be able to then provide their additional feedback or look at your stuff and say, actually, that's not a problem because of this, solution that we can have here, and make everyone else then part of it. But like being able to make that kind of decision is like such a huge, it's a Spider-Man kind of responsibility thing, and like enjoy it, but also like do it justice, and you will learn so much from that. And it's just like doing that for your team. That's how you're going to discover all of those things that unfortunately a lot of people see in hindsight only.
It's pretty good when when you see and we can imagine your architecture. You can make a decision what I will use, Node, Java, Go, Python. But sometimes we don't know what we will use, and we don't know how it will be in the future because customer didn't provide all requirements. Node is the best choice. Moreover, there is a real production case when we do replatforming using Node. So we have a legacy application written on different languages, okay? Maybe Java. And you can make a proxy, make a layer, for example, two solutions. You can change your legacy application, you make a layer, and you divide your monolith to microservices. You use mocks, and Node is a proxy here. It's the best solution. So you can continue being in production, maintain traffic. If you'd like to go from GSP to Angular, for example, right, or Backbone, or something else, Ember, Node is the best solution, right? Because it's really good for interaction between browser. Or even you do applications that works with Kafka, like with data streaming. I don't think so that you will pass data from Kafka to browser. Yeah. Probably you will use Node for that, for communication, interaction. It's a really best solution. In the past, as you know, Node was changed too frequently. It was not a good solution to just write once and forget about it, and forget. Because VA changes, Node changes, environment changes. Now Node is really major platform. We can use it and use Node.js.
Hard to argue with that one. Yeah, it really feels like I'm regurgitating my talk from 3 years ago from Node.js EU. It really equipped me with sufficient amount of thought leaderiness. Because when I was talking to people about language is just a tool, I brought this example. Imagine you have a axe and you have a chainsaw. One is definitely more powerful tool than the other. Now imagine that you are the Canadian woodcutting champion for like 3 years in a row. Somebody's gonna hand you a chainsaw, and you're used to your artisanal, like handcrafted axe that you used to be chopping down trees like no one else. And the only thing you would be cutting off is like half a leg with the chainsaw because you're not used to how to use that tool. So that's a long-buried lead to telling you that actually the system you're choosing has to depend on exactly the same qualities that my panel mate Lisa here told you. You have to consider who are going to be using the tool and who are going to be and where that tool is going to be operated and what issues it's going to solve. And here's the thing. Like Node is stable enough and Node is like large enough and supported enough to take on almost every single project that you might be able to come across on Earth, depending on the expertise that you and your team and your architects have. So if you have the sufficient expertise, there's a very small sliver of applications that you are not going to be able to pull off in Node. And the optimum can come from a lot of different ways, and there is a good chance that if you're going to be using a big application that Node is not suited for, you're probably going to be using multiple technologies behind it anyway. So yeah. Just use Node if you feel like it, and you use the other tool that you see that is fit for the problem, and you see that you can use it properly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more tiny thing, which is, and by this we're not saying like, yeah, never switch languages from the one that you already know. It's like, be ready for the effort that you're gonna have to make adapting to a new mental model, to a new syntax, to a new whatever. If you and the rest of your team are pretty much on board and paying for that and like taking the time to not being like proficient enough or not being fluent enough in that language, then awesome. You're probably gonna come out of that project as a much better developer because now you have an understanding of how another language works. But be ready for that and consider that beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's been a theme emerging, I feel like, in our answers and our discussions over the last hour or so, that I think what I'm hearing everyone else say and what I believe is that, none of these languages, tools, technologies, editors, whatever it is, nothing is objectively the best or better or worse than something else. It can only be considered that way in light of the problem you're trying to solve, the resources you have, the subjective experience that you and your team are bringing to it. There's so many variables. And so I think the thing that we can do collectively is just really try to encourage each other to keep an open mind, to keep learning new technologies, to keep trying out new things, to keep talking to each other, sharing our stories, sharing our experiences, and to keep sharing our decision making, as Suze was saying, of how we are assessing these different tools, because they're really just tools, right? The axe and the chainsaw, love it, love the metaphor. The chainsaw's great, but what happens when you run out of fuel for it? An axe is going to be better in the zombie apocalypse scenario, I firmly believe. So it's always subjective. There's always factors to be taken into consideration, and I think the best thing we can do is all just keep talking to each other about it. So that's why it's so wonderful to be here with all of you chatting about all this stuff, and I hope all of you are having great conversations about it as well while you're here. That's the best we can hope for.
With us later, obviously.
With all of us.
All right. Thank you so much.